Good morning. Hope your Wednesday is off to a good start. Mine is so far. Nice morning in my outdoor office. And a second cup of coffee. So I guess unless you are living under a rock or you just gotten off a spaceship coming back from Mars or something, you know that the Pope died a couple of days ago, Pope Francis, and thought I would reflect on that for a couple of minutes and to the best of my ability sort of give you a little bit of understanding about who the Pope is and how popes are selected and all of that sort of stuff. And obviously I'm speaking from a Protestant perspective. I'm not a Roman Catholic. So I'm going to give it as best as I can, as best I know, best I understand. Well, let me mention this before I get into like the real idea, like who a pope is, how they are selected, and that sort of stuff. For us Protestants, this is a good time not to blast on social media all of the errors that we think we see in the Roman Catholic Church. We don't need to do that now. Jesus said, "They'll know that you're my disciples by how you love one another." So this is a time to show some grace. It's not the time to post on social media that something about all of the abuse scandals in the Roman Catholic Church or this doctrine or that doctrine that we might disagree with. It's not the time. We can have those debates at another time. If we are going to be Christ-like, this is an occasion where we pray for our Roman Catholic friends. That's the more Christ-like response. And so, Pope Francis, and then the office of the papacy itself. Pope Francis, to the best of my understanding, was something of a reformer. He tried to reform some things about the way the church operated, and certainly in that I would defer to a Roman Catholic who would understand church practices far better than I would. He was Pope Francis he was more interested in the affairs of the poor and the marginalized than most popes are. A certain amount of concern for the poor and the marginalized is baked into Christianity. It's always there in authentic Christianity. He probably emphasized the poor and the marginalized more than most. And this is a good time to remind us that we in America don't need to look at popes and project onto particular popes or the office of the papacy itself our American political ideologies. We don't need to look at the Pope through the lens of American politics. Any Pope is going to do things and have beliefs that will run counter to both American left and the American right. So don't look at a Pope as being left-wing, right-wing in terms of American politics. It's apples and oranges. Pope Francis, to the best of my knowledge, sort of was willing to forego a lot of the trappings of the papacy. He acknowledged any core Catholic teaching on controversial stuff, but he tried to make the church, I guess, more open or more accepting without changing any core church doctrines. So he was the Pope, Pope Francis. So the Pope is the spiritual head, the head of the Roman Catholic Church. That is the largest Christian body in the world. There are some 1.4 billion Roman Catholics worldwide, and the Pope is the head of the church. The Pope is the Bishop of Rome. So the Pope is the Bishop of Rome, and papal authority comes from the idea that St. Peter was the first bishop of Rome. Jesus tells Peter, I'll build my church, you're the rock on which I'll build my church. The gates of hell won't prevail against it. What you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. What you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. That bit from Matthew chapter 16. So Peter is the first bishop of Rome, and the Roman Catholic Church, by tradition, their popes go all the way back to Peter. And because Peter is the first bishop of Rome, Rome was the largest and the most important bishoprics, if that's the correct term to use. The Pope becomes most important of the bishops in the early church, and that power centers coalesces. So the Pope is the Bishop of Rome. Pope is the Bishop of Rome. Rome is the most important of the bishops, and because the Bishop of Rome is operating under the spiritual authority of St. Peter, he has great power. This is according to my understanding of their church teaching. The Pope is, to a certain extent, a pastor to 1.4 billion people. That doesn't mean that the Pope can visit, certainly isn't going to visit 1.4 billion people if they are in the hospital or preach the funeral for that many people. No, of course not. But the Pope is the spiritual head of the church. Actually, the Pope is something of a head of state as well. The Vatican is technically a tiny independent nation located within the heart of Rome. And at times in past, the Vatican state, the Vatican states have been much larger than that. And at various times, popes do get involved in international diplomacy. One of the things that is hard for us as Protestants to understand, but as part of Catholic doctrine, is that the Pope, at least when speaking what's called ex cathedra, is thought to be infallible. It's not that the Pope is incapable of making a mistake, no, but it's that when the Pope is speaking ex cathedra, when the Pope is speaking in a matter of doctrine, that teaching is infallible. A later Pope, I suppose, could amend that, but there is the doctrine that a Pope's teaching, when speaking ex cathedra on a matter of doctrine, is infallible. One of the curious things that I ran across in doing a bit of reading is that there's a fair amount of debate about how often popes actually do that, like when a pope is speaking ex cathedra and when he's not. So the popes, like I said, they trace their lineage all the way back to St. Peter, who is the first bishop of Rome. That's the tradition. It goes all the way back. um, the vast majority of popes have served until their death. They are they are elected and they serve until they die. There have been a handful that have resigned. In fact, Pope Francis' predecessor, Benedict the 16th, if memory serves me right, resigned from office. And Pope Benedict died just a couple of years ago. So what happens next? You have like centuries of protocol and tradition that sort of fall into place. It's, I guess, analogous to in England, Great Britain. The monarch dies, and you have centuries of protocol that kick into gear about what happens regarding a funeral and installation of the next monarch. We've just seen this play out with the death of Queen Elizabeth II and then the accession to the throne of her son, Charles, who I think is reigning as Charles III. And so you've got, with the death of Pope Francis, you've got centuries, probably well over a millennia of tradition that sort of kicks in. There are set formalities regarding the official mourning for the Pope. The funeral rites, I read, have recently been altered some, actually altered by Francis himself to make them simpler. Francis opted not to be buried in the Vatican. He opted not to be buried in the Vatican, but to be buried in a cathedral out and across the river from the Vatican. St. Mary Maggiore, I think, is the name of the cathedral. There have been a handful of popes buried there, but the vast majority have been buried in the Vatican. He has also opted, I read, to be buried in a very simple wood coffin. And that would be in keeping with basically his way of conducting himself as Pope. Because he didn't like a lot of the trappings of the papacy. And it'll be interesting to see, once a new Pope is selected, whether the next Pope does revert back to more of the trappings, if you will, of the papacy, the higher church garb, the use of the Pope mobile, a large armored car. So, the Pope the actual funeral is going to be this coming Saturday, and then after that, the College of Cardinals will be meeting. The College of Cardinals is a group of clerics that serve as, ordinarily speaking, as advisors to the Pope. The number of cardinals has varied a lot over the years. For a lot of church history, it was anywhere from the 30 to 50 range. But in the last 100 years, that number has grown. And that should be understandable because the number of the world population has grown, the number of Roman Catholics has grown, so one would expect that the number of cardinals would grow. The term cardinal, think about a cardinal as an adjective for something important, a cardinal rule of such and such. So these are cardinal. A cardinal actually comes from what was originally called a cardinal bishop. So these are the most important. These are important bishops, archbishops, Right now there are, pardon me while I wait for the truck. Right now there are about 250 cardinals. The cardinals are selected. They are appointed by the Pope, and the College of Cardinals selects the new Pope. And a curious thing about the election of the Pope, the cardinals, only those cardinals that are under 80 are eligible to vote for a Pope. And when you hit your 80th birthday, you're no longer eligible to vote for the Pope. So in a few days after the funeral, the College of Cardinals, the cardinal electors, which right now number 135, the cardinal electors will hold up in the Vatican. They will swear themselves to secrecy in their proceedings, and they will conduct a series of ballots, 4 ballots every day. From the time they gather and hold an initial mass, take a vow of secrecy, they will take 4 ballots every day until one person receives a 2/3 vote. They will hold 4 ballots every day until 2/3 of them have named the same person on their ballot. And that normally takes, that'll take 2 or 3 weeks normally. So for instance, if they conclave together a week from now, next Wednesday, just hypothetically, we shouldn't expect the next Pope to be named next Friday. Doesn't happen that fast. Popes almost always are drawn from the College of Cardinals. Traditionally, the vast majority of the popes have been Italian, but that has broken down, so that Francis was from Argentina, Benedict I think was German, John Paul II I think was Polish, if memory serves me right. So historically the popes were Italian, but the last 3 popes have not been, and I have no idea who the next pope will be. I'm not a Catholic, so I'm not I don't have any knowledge of who the most likely candidates are. But like I said, the College of Cardinals, those who are under 80, and that number is 135, those 135 will meet beginning several days after the funeral. They'll go into what you might call an extended executive session. They will leave only to eat and sleep. 4 ballots a day until one person is named on 2/3 of those ballots. After that takes place, after somebody has received 2/3 votes, the dean of the College of Cardinals will go to that person and ask him, are you willing to become Pope? And almost always that person says yes. I did read that there was one occasion back in the late 70s when the cardinal declined to become Pope, but it is part of the ritual that he's asked if he will agree to become Pope, to accept the role, and almost always that person says yes. And once he says yes, the College of Cardinals, they gather all of the ballots and they burn them in a small stove. And you burn them in the small stove, and obviously when you burn them in a small stove, and you have smoke that comes out of the chimney. And that is traditionally the sign that you have a pope that's been elected. You see a puff of smoke coming out of a small pipe in the Vatican. So, with that, I would encourage you to be in prayer for our Roman Catholic brothers and sisters. We don't have to agree with them on every matter of doctrine. That's okay. We don't have to. I don't agree with everything the Catholics teach. I may be wrong. They may be right. We'll find out in the hereafter, on the other side of the river, as they say. But we can be compassionate, and we can show mercy, and we can pray for them. They are, they're hurting right now. In fact, I had thought about calling a local Roman Catholic priest to sort of get his thoughts on this, and decided not to, simply because I figured his life is hard enough right now without me bugging him. So anyway, with that, I hope you have a great rest of your day.